I think at first people are like, well, if someone's using AI, they're kind of cheating. And don't I want the person who doesn't use AI, does it the old fashioned way? It's really the opposite. It's almost like if someone's not using the AI, it's almost like they're stealing from the company or from their client because they're charging them to do something that it shouldn't take that long to do or that could be done more efficiently.
Hello and welcome to Building Brand Gravity. I'm Steve Halsey.
And I'm Anne Green, and we're excited to be teaming up for a special series on AI. This series is really intending to dive in a bit deeper, speak to a couple key experts, both from outside and inside our company, and also just take some time before we bring on our guests to explore some key AI things in the news.
I'm really excited. In this episode, we're going to talk to our old friend, the friend of the pod, Greg Galant, co-founder and CEO of Muck Rack. We're going to really dive into the latest research they have on the adoption of AI. And then you're going to be talking to our own Lauren King, really looking at AI application in specific markets.
Yeah, that'll be in an upcoming episode. Lauren is on, he's in one of our two go-to-market agencies. He's with Morgan Myers, a GNS agency, and he's a digital leader and specialist and really deep in the space. So I think it'll be great to get Greg's perspective on the big picture of where things are going for the industry, because they do so much good research. And then with Lauren, we're going to try to get a little bit deeper about the things he's really looking at now for clients, and especially in one of our big spaces, which is agriculture, but also food. He does a lot of work in both of those spaces.
When I get Greg here in just a minute for all our listeners, some really amazing stats on the adoption. In the end of 2023, just 28% of communication professionals were actively using generative AI. Turn of this year, 75% of PR pros are using it. And what's interesting in there is 93% say it speeds up the work, and 78% are now saying it improves the quality of that work. You were recently featured in PR Week. They did an article as part of the agency business report, the AI audit, where they were really talking about the impact of AI, some really interesting perspectives in there about driving a culture of exploration. How do you mainstream it? But what are some of the things from that article that really stood out to you from your perspective?
It's part of the agency business report that PR Week does every year, the 2025. And I got a chance to talk to one of the journalists there, Noah Zuss, and we had a pretty deep conversation. First, for the agency business report overall, just what's going on with the agency and the landscape. But we started talking about AI, and he said, I want to follow up with you, because he was taking on this AI audit. So I think for me, what was interesting, and we were in great company there, some folks from Golan and Edelman and some other firms. What's most interesting to me, I think, on the macro level is how are we all really getting into enablement, rubber on the road? What are those pilot programs, and how are you training people on that and getting them to disrupt their own workflow? And then what's the higher order where we're going to use these tools to improve, really augment our abilities to be counselors and strategic. So I thought there was some really good things here. I remember the person from Edelman was talking about transforming the business model, and that's how I'm seeing it now. It really is it's a digital transformation process, and it's incumbent upon us to both be leading it and also be side by side with our clients and exploring what's the relevance to them and their workflows.
Yeah, 100%. And so as you see that maturization in how it's being used, one of the other things I thought was interesting, which is a point that you've been talking about at the industry level, 75% of pros say they are worried, however, that AI will stunt the learning of younger pros because they're not going through the same process that we used to, the old Bacons, to find reporters and update it and all of those things. So what's kind of your take as an industry, a little bit of ironic here, to not just have the adoption happen from the senior professionals who can apply it and somewhat stunt the development of younger professionals who we need to continue what we're doing?
I think what's more specifically a lot of us are wondering about is our products are people. and it's intellectual capital and it's experience built in sectors over time. And it's a lot of mentoring down, laterally mentoring up. The fact that we have all these generations in the workforce is a real benefit. And our younger people learn by doing. We're going to have to think really hard about how do we use tools to help those younger professionals get to strategy and counsel faster, and also make sure that more senior people can give them the context. So there's contextual layer. It's not just go write a press release. Well, now the AI knows how to do this. And is it any good? And what's the context of that? I think there's got to be layers of mentoring within this, just to make sure that we don't lose the talent. We keep building it so that it can work side by side with tech. I mean, but what are your thoughts? Because I think this is a sticky issue.
I will quote the great coach Ted Lasso, who was quoting Walt Whitman of always be curious, right? Be curious, not judgmental. And I think that's really what we have to foster in our younger professionals, is to be curious and to think about how you use the tools to build up that expertise in the industries you serve, the clients that you serve. Because at the end of the day, if you can use AI to help become a better counselor, a better strategist, and if you're able to be curious and bring that perspective, then I think the potential for what younger employees can do is amazing. But like you said, you've got to have that context.
And really, another part of this, I'm just all about how do we upskill ourselves? The fact is, real mass upskilling at scale very rarely happens. So we have to do everything we can as an entity, and our clients do, and everyone does, to help train. But then how do people embrace that?
Well, we got a lot in store in these 2 episodes. I'm going to jump over and hit Greg up and see what we have to learn. With me today is a friend of the podcast, Greg Galant, co-founder and CEO of Muck Rack, one of the leading technology platforms serving PR and comms team. Greg, welcome back to Building Brand Gravity.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Steve.
You guys did an amazing study. I just kept reading it again and again at the turn of the year, the state of the AI in PR. And I guess as we get started here, why don't you tell me a little bit about maybe some of your top lines from the study, and that can get us going with today's conversation.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, we've done a number of these studies, and we've been using AI, machine learning, and now generative AI, but going back over a decade. So it's something we've been focused on for a long time. But we started measuring how their corporate comms and PR communities using AI. And I think the big takeaway is just the jump of adoption. Over the course of 1 year, we saw the number of, or the portion of PR people using AI went from 28% to 75%. I think of any other technology that had that big of jump of adoption in just 1 year.
And when you look at that adoption, I mean, is it just because the profession is catching up, or is it that the technology, particularly the large language models, are evolving so quickly that their applicability to the day-to-day work of PR pros they're just like intersecting at that magic point?
I think it's a combination of those 2 factors. One is it takes everybody a while just to learn any new technology, and more than to learn it, because it's one thing to just try playing with OpenAI, but it's another, or a platform like that, but it's another thing to really think like, how do you work it into your workflows and make it kind of fundamental? I think another is the improvement, both that the LLMs got much more powerful. They added many more ways to integrate into workflows. They got better at citing sources. So there's a lot more power there now, and it's easier to double check their work with the kind of more agentic search-based AIs that can now give citations. And then finally too, there's a lot more ways to use AI. So platforms like ours, like Muck Rack, have integrated AI into the platform. So even if you aren't using like a pure LLM, you might well be using AI through tools you've been used to using for a long time.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a fascinating part of the discussion, that, AI is getting baked into so many things that it becomes part of where we're doing. You get, kind of the learning and adoption, but, I'm also seeing and talking to a lot of professionals and peers that are kind of creating AI versions of themselves. So they're using paid versions of the large language models, uploading their information. And that'll be a great for when we get in a later conversation of, at what point does the professional stop and the AI start, if what it's processing is your own thoughts. The other big headline stats for me, other than the 75% are now using generative AI, was 93% says it speeds up their work and 78% says it improves their quality. I mean, what was your take when you guys pulled all the numbers and it was like, wow, look at that, 93 and 78%.
Yeah, it's powerful. I mean, it's not surprising it speeds up people's work, but 93 is definitely, to get 93% of people to agree on anything in this world is a hard thing. I kind of think of it the same way that, like, what a spreadsheet must have been like when it first came out. And if you had a bunch of math problems and the spreadsheet's out there and you need to do your financial model, it's going to speed you up tremendously and you could do so much more. AI brought about by LLMs is more or less like kind of that for the written word for research, which is so much of what PR people need to do. It's writing, it's researching what's going on, and then it's reading and summarizing. So it makes total sense that the PR profession can really leverage AI with a lot of pieces of their workflow.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see the evolution, because when you and I caught up last year, we were really talking about AI in the newsroom and how that's kind of evolving. But it really seems like right now top performing teams are really using it, brainstorming, writing, research, those sorts of things. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about, outside some of those large language models, how are professionals interacting with AI in your own tools at Muck Rack, whether they know they are or not?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we have a lot of AI pieces in Muck Rack. For example, we have a feature where if you have a media list, it'll automatically suggest new journalists to add to that media list based on who's on there. Kind of very similar to if you use Spotify and you finish your playlist, it'll just figure out new music to keep playing, and it usually is pretty good, and in line with the other stuff on the playlist. It gives you that ability, so you can be discovering journalists who had never thought to reach out to before. Another piece that we built in that's very exciting is a media brief generator. So if you've got an executive meeting with a given journalist within Muck Rack, you can use all the Muck Rack data to figure out like the first draft of a media brief that you'd give that executive to prep them for that meeting with that journalist. And I think that's really exciting because until now, like, there was no software that could do anything like that for you, because software just wasn't able to, write stuff and add that level of contextualization. So it's just, another example where there used to be, PR software has been around for decades. There used to just be all these elements, the PR workflow that the software could not help with because it was based on writing and reading conference that the software was incapable of. Now that's all possible, and now we can build out those complete workflows and make people a lot more efficient.
We've come a long way from when I started in this career, and we had to go through those bacon media guides that you would flip through to get everybody. But it's interesting, how you talk about the ability to prep for the interview. But with all these changes and all the possibilities, some other things that really stuck out to me in the report was, I'm kind of calling it like the policy and training gap. At least that's how I think about it. That only 38% of PR pros report having company guidelines for how they use AI. And 43% of agency pros report having access to training versus 31% of professionals at brands. I mean, if we've got these numbers where, you've got such a significant number of professionals using it. Is it good or bad that that the guidance is lacking so much at this point in time?
Yeah, I think that's an area that the industry, and I think it's a challenge for every business, has to get a lot better with and take a lot more seriously, because having those policies and having the proper training is super important, because AI is not perfect. And the reason we want the human in the loop, people involved in this, is to make sure the output's good and that it's being used in a responsible way. I think another thing that's pretty key is to review the policies, and companies need to review their policies. Probably quarterly is a good idea, but at least once a year. Because when AI first came out, a lot of people rushed out policies that I think were, you know, maybe the right thing at the time, but very conservative and reactionary. So now that AI's come along a lot further, you really have to look back at those policies, because otherwise I think it's like people either have no policy and it's the Wild West, or they have some policy they wrote when AI first came out and it's like, don't use AI, or, only use AI with approval. It's not just about going to chatgpt.com anymore and that's AI. It's that in, Outlook or Gmail, like AI is baked in there. So there, it's almost like your team is going to be using AI no matter what. And I think the key is to write AI policies that map to where the world is today and are clear, and the people at a company can actually follow, versus having it like, okay, we signed this AI policy that doesn't really map to what the technology is today, so I either have to ignore it or not use AI.
We're starting to see a lot more with procurement as we're working through contracts, having to be really specific about AI. How do we use generative AI? Even just asking about like what AI is built into the software we're using, which, from where you're sitting as a technology platform, is kind of an interesting question, because you really want to be upfront about some stuff, but then it's also part of your secret sauce, that you don't want to give away. So from asking you from where you sit as kind of like a technology platform leader, what are the things that you need to do to give trust in the users of your products and ultimately their customers, that you've got standards that is being treated ethically?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's about transparency and showing, where you're using AI and how you're using AI, the safeguards that you're putting into it for, human review on the output that you have from AI, and how, how you're kind of handling that data responsibly. And I think at the end of the day, the most important thing, ironically, is good human judgment, where, people, every knowledge worker has been using technology to do their job efficiently for the last several decades. Even before the latest advances in AI, imagine you said, hey, we need you to state every way you're using powerful cloud software on our behalf and spreadsheets on our behalf and all that. And to some degree, it's like, well, what really matters is that you have the judgment to use all these powerful tools in a responsible way and create a good output. So I think on one hand, being transparent and explaining how you're, going about your process is needed, but also I think it's important people don't get too draconian about like prescribing exactly what to do, versus making sure they're working with people who can just exercise good judgment in using these tools and in reviewing the output and being good work output.
There's also the interesting innovation curve too, that if you put too much guidelines, too much style, you could lose a competitive advantage, because you're not fully unleashing the innovation that is possible, either an individual team or a broader company. And that's where just some other stats that I said, they're just such some amazing stats, and we'll put the link to the study in here as well for everybody. But some of the other stats that were interesting along this lines was that 37% of brand side pros say they always want disclosure from their agency when they're using AI, but only 20% of AI pros say they always disclose. It's interesting to me seeing kind of almost the doubling of the brand side pros that want to use it versus the agency pros that say they want to use it. And part of me says, geez, that's a big gap. What is the deal with that, Greg? The other part of me is saying, well, but if what a lot of you are using it is baked in, I mean, how do you really disclose that? I mean, is that something you hear much? Kind of that mix between the brand side and agency side on disclosure?
I think that tension's always been there. Like I've been, ever since I got into this business, I've been hearing brands saying they want the agency to show them all the emails that they're sending on their behalf and all the pitches, and the agency people saying, hey, this is our secret sauce. This is our relationships. We don't want to show you all of our pitches. So I think there's some element where this is just the latest front of that tension that you naturally have between an agency and their client, where the agency, on one hand, people care about results, and the agency wants to say, hey, look, let us give you the results and don't question our methods. And then to some degree, brands are always like, well, we're curious how you got there. We want to monitor it. So I don't think it's anything new. I just think AI is the latest front in that tension that's always existed there.
I think you're probably right there. And then like one of the other big areas of tension is just around, originality, the human factor, editing, all those sorts of things. And again, just a plethora of just such fascinating data in here. Here was one of the pieces I thought was really interesting, that of the pros using AI, 98% edit the output, but only 51% now say they have to rewrite most of it versus 61% saying that last year. So what do I read from that, Greg? Does that just mean that the software is becoming that much better, or does that mean as pros we're getting better in how we're using and applying it, or is it a little bit of a combination of both?
I think it's definitely both. I mean, it's undeniable it's gotten way better in the last year, both in terms of what AI is capable of and also how it's been integrated. I think even if they stopped improving AI, even if there had been no improvements in AI in the past 2 years, just taking what was invented 2 years ago and getting that into all the software products and into people's workflows would be a huge lift and would take 10 years. And that's happening, and it's getting better as we go. So I think there's that element. And then I think, getting used to it is really powerful. Like, I think it was Sam Altman was saying that that kind of our generation is more using it to replace Google search and look stuff up for us, and younger generations, it's their personal operating system and they don't do anything without consulting it, and they've trained AI on how they work, and it's kind of become this companion for them, or this extra superpower, and stuff like that. It just takes time to play out, to think how to use it, when to use it, what are the right questions to ask. And that's really the exciting frontier here.
I really expected to see more of a generational divide in AI adoption. I was expecting to see kind of like what we saw with a lot of the social media and a lot of digital marketing to skew heavily towards the younger audience and less more senior. But ironically, what I found is that it's the senior and more mid-level professionals that are actually adopting at a higher pace because they can deploy it in a little bit different ways. Is that something that you're seeing? Are you seeing any kind of age cohorts or big generational shifts in how people think about AI?
I think in a way, the more senior people have a lot more leverage to get with AI, because the more senior you are, the more pressed you are for time, and time becomes very precious. Clients want to see you. You have management responsibilities. There's more and more pressure. So there's actually a much bigger economic value that if you can find ways to leverage AI to save you time, help you prep for meetings last minute, take notes, etc. Like you're actually getting a much bigger piece of leverage off that than the more junior person. So I think that's why it's getting kind of such adoption across, levels of seniority and age cohorts. It's just so powerful. And it's also something that everybody's now using in their personal life too. So, it kind of feeds on itself, similar to when like the internet came out. And that if you're going home and you're finding all these interesting use cases for AI, you're having it plan your vacation, figure out where to go for dinner, telling it what's in your fridge and having it suggest recipes for you. Like you can't do all that at home and then walk into work and not think of a few good use cases for AI.
I also think, some of the adoption as you think about AI, whether you're using it for creativity or efficiency, it's almost like those are like two axes on the grid. I think really create some interesting ways to think about it. And then also, I guess as I think about like the more senior versus junior professionals' use of AI, I would postulate that the more senior members of our profession could probably prompt better because they have intuitively a better knowledge of the industry, of the trends, of what they're trying to accomplish, that may guide their ability to prompt a little bit better, which kind of raises there were some question in like one of yours, which was one of the big concern is about 75%, if I remember correctly, kind of worry that AI is going to stunt the learning for younger pros. I mean, what was kind of your reaction when you saw that stat come out?
I'd back up, what you just said made me think of another point, I think for more senior people that one of the things you learn going into the management is how to explain what you want to junior people. And I think that the classic thing that new managers do wrong is they don't explain what they want. So they say, hey, get me a media list. Junior person makes a media list. It comes back and then they realize like, oh, wait, this media list sucks, but it's not because you did a bad job. It's I didn't explain this is a media list for so-and-so. And here's a method you should use. And here's, what I've learned all my years. And so it's pretty analogous to prompting where it's like, if you're prompting, you have to really explain what you want and then you get a good result. But if you don't explain what you want, you get a bad result. So I think in a way, learning to manage people is great experience for knowing how to prompt. Managing, it's really just prompting another person to do something. But I do think, I do wonder with that, it's like, okay, it's going to stunt learning the stuff that can now be done by AI. But that's also not worth learning now because AI can do it the same way that, knowing how to do the arithmetic behind a financial model, how to multiply quickly is not a valuable skill. Like knowing how to write the formulas is valuable skill, but not doing quick multiplication and addition and subtraction and all that. There'll be a bunch of stuff that someone used to spend a bunch of time doing that they can now do super fast. On the other hand, there'll be, new companies and jobs and, new potential, things, opportunities created and work tasks created that people will be doing that never existed before due to the abundance created by AI. And, where that will net out, nobody knows, but that'll be, the world that we're going through, and we can't really control the macro of it. So I think everyone needs to focus on how they can be best leveraging AI. So, they're able to make sure that they set themselves up for real career greatness. And that's where I think junior people might have the advantage or have a competitive advantage just growing up using AI in a much more fundamental way, at least according to that Sam Altman interview, that if they can come in knowing like, hey, I know how to create GPTs and train the rest of the team on how to use it and share prompts and connect different applications together with AI. It's they're able to bring valuable new skills.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting point you made just a little bit ago when you were talking about learning the management skill, and if you can engage and manage individuals and you learn that skill, you can do that with the prompt. So I really love that explain and manage the prompt, and kind of this idea that as you move up as a professional, you're not just managing people, you're managing the AI, but there is some commonality in how you manage people that applies to how you manage the AI, if for no other reason, how it's been designed to, I guess, mimic human thought and approach. So I think that's really interesting.
I mean, that's the powerful thing about AIs now with LLMs is that you can speak to them with normal language rather than having to write code, and it gives you this advantage. The better you are with language, the better you are at explaining what you need, the better results you'll get from the LLMs, and that's where I think the PR profession can really excel, because they're communicators. They know how to express themselves. They can be thoughtful about asking questions, about thinking of new ways to research, about directing what the LLM should do, and if they can find the right way to leverage this all, then it's a real force multiplier.
Kind of leads me to I want to share something. So we'll go a little bit dystopian, and then we'll kind of bring it back to reality. But it was an article recently I read in Axios called "Behind the Curtain." Certainly clickbait title, "A White Collar Bloodbath." But Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, was basically saying that AI could wipe out a significant number of entry-level jobs, specifically across technology, finance, law, consulting, especially like entry-level gigs. But I thought there were some interesting things in that. He was talking about how tech companies like OpenAI, Google, Anthropic are really leveraging basically vast improved capabilities of large language models to meet or beat human performance on more and more tasks, hopefully the ones that are less valuable. This I thought was interesting, was far too many workers still see chatbots mainly as a fancy search engine, a tireless researcher, or a brilliant proofreader, but they're not really understanding how fantastic they are at summarizing, brainstorming, reading documents, reviewing legal contracts, interpreting medical symptoms and health records. And just kind of close to this, that AI models are being used mainly at present for augmentation, helping people do their job. But with the rise of more automation, agentic AI, and agents, it's going to fundamentally shift the landscape. So a little bit dramatic, a little bit dystopian, but what's kind of your like take and reaction to kind of his take in terms of where we're at right now?
Yeah, I think it's a provocative take, and I think it's indisputable that AI is going to change every job. And I think he's right that a lot of people are underestimating what you can do with AI, simply because a lot of people have only had limited amounts of time to try to push it to its boundaries. Some people too have been a lot of people going back to the policies. Maybe they haven't been able to upload certain documents to AI due to policies, and once they can find out how to deploy AI in a secure environment, they can leverage it up, or they're hamstrung by regulatory issues. That once that people find compliant ways to use AI, it will become much more powerful. So I think it's going to have a huge impact on every job. I think that the big question still, and I think where it's hard to have that certainty, even if you're someone running an LLM company, you definitely have to be a genius to do that. But it's still hard to know, like, okay, if it just destroys a certain percentage of the existing jobs, how many jobs does it create? Where does the that efficiency in the economy flow through to make new opportunity. And that's something I think that's confounded people for years, where, with every new technological invention, there's always this assumption that, it changes the world today. It's hard to know exactly how it plays out, but, just think even in PR, right? Like it used to be you draft one version of a press release because it takes a while to draft a press release. And just imagine if 3 years ago, even before the LLMs came out, if I said, hey, we got this big announcement. I want 10 versions of the press release written in different styles and pushing different angles. You'd say to me, that's crazy. Someone's going to have to spend, dozens or hundreds of hours writing 10 versions of this one press release. Like that would be, that would, just be a waste of time, and since you have to pay for time, a big waste of money. Now, if I said, hey, I want 10 versions of the press release in different styles, emphasizing different elements, you'd be like, no problem. I can create that with the LLM, and you do it in an hour, and we read through them all and kick around which would be the best. So I think there's just all these ways where like the abundance created by AI can create new work to do we would have never thought to have done before. And no one knows how that's going to play out, but it's going to be a really interesting ride.
Yeah, it certainly is not a boring time to be in our profession. And I want to be clear, I don't share the dystopian view. I agree that it's going to impact every life, but then in every job. But then you got to think about value creation and model creation. I'm a models guy, so I'm sorry, I'm always thinking in models. But if you think on like the x-axis, like that's like your efficiency and productivity axis, and then your Y is almost kind of like your strategy and creative enabling axis. That lower left quadrant obviously is not where you want to be. That's where you see AI as a threat to the craft, right? It's undermining traditional skills, practices, and competencies. And oh my gosh, what are we going to do? But as you move forward on that productivity model, I'm starting to see that there are a number of agencies and pros that are being very, very deft in how they use AI, almost like a studio assistant, emphasizing its role. How does it improve our productivity, our operational efficiencies? What are those things? If you kind of go up on the y-axis, it's almost like AI as almost kind of like a creative catalyst. How can this help me unleash my thinking? How can I drive more strategic insights and outcomes? And at least from my mind, I don't necessarily want to go, I don't want to be in the thread of the craft. I don't just want an assistant. I don't just want to be creative. It's almost, how do you get then to that upper right quadrant of like AI as a multiplier, right? Driving strategic insights, creative outcomes. I think the agencies and professionals that can figure out how to get there are the ones that are going to see tremendous success and tremendous growth as this adoption continues to evolve.
I think it's one of those things where the more, it's almost like, I think at first people are like, well, if someone's using AI, they're kind of cheating, and don't I want the person who doesn't use AI, does it the old-fashioned way. It's really the opposite. It's almost like if someone's not using the AI, it's almost like they're stealing from the company or from their client, because they're charging them to do something that, that it shouldn't take that long to do, or that could be done more efficiently. And, even if you're at a company and you're not being paid by the hour, it's that you could be having this much more efficient output, that instead of, doing something the tedious way, you can do it a better way. And like you were saying, it's not just the AI automating the tedious parts, but maybe you could have a better idea to share with your company if you brainstorm around what to do with it. Like just this week, we were coming up with a new name for a feature that we're working on. And a couple of years ago, we would have just sat around brainstorming names and kicking them around on Slack and coming up by one. Now, one person on our team just went to Claude, popped in 50 names and said, yeah, I just pulled this from Claude. We went through them, and some of them were compelling, and we settled on one that we really liked. We still had to check, is someone else using that name? Think through, is it unique enough? We had to throw away a lot of really bad ideas that AI gave us. But it's just one of those things where like we might have spent the same amount of time otherwise, but not gotten to as good a name because we would have never been able to brainstorm so many variations in such a short amount of time. So it's, I think it's like we owe it, to our clients, to our company, to our team members, to society to be as effective as we can with AI and really bring that force multiplier to play. And I think those that do will be the ones who are most successful.
So since you mentioned new feature, I'm not going to ask you to disclose it now, but so what does like the AI roadmap look like for a company like yours? Because to me, it's got to be fascinating to be both in the tech platform development space and everything that you have to do with that, but then think about the application and what is inherently a very human-centric storytelling industry. I mean, how do you balance that? And what's next? What's coming from Muck Rack?
Yeah, well said. Well, I think that's a great point about the industry, and that I think in a way the PR industry's, some of the best set for AI because of the human element of it, like that relationship building, the trust building that the PR community has to do with journalists, with podcasters, newsletter writers, everyone they need to reach for earned media. Like that's something that you can't fully automate. You can't be like, hey, this company's AI is saying this, so trust it. New York Times. You're like, no, I need to talk to somebody at the company and know what's going on. So I think it's an industry that's really well set up for this era. And then also the effect of news articles in influencing what LLMs say, since LLMs train on news articles and cite them, is extremely powerful. So, when you get a press placement, this force multiplier that AI is trained on those press mentions. So I think it's never been a better time for this industry. And then the opportunity for us is to continue the journey that we're on with using AI to be involved in more parts of the PR workflow, like with that media brief generator that I mentioned, is an example where we'll be launching lots of new features like that help people use AI in ways they never could before. And then also in finding ways to take things in that you do within PR that might be tedious, and maybe even tedious in Muck Rack, the parts of the platform that were built before the AI era, and bring a lot of AI to make that more efficient. And as we've already been doing with things like that media list recommendation piece, to save people the time of having to manually look up every additional journalist to add. But there's just a ton of opportunities like that. And the way that we look at it is the more we can make our customers more efficient in the software, the more time they can do the human parts of their job and building those relationships and doing the storytelling elements of PR and working with their executives to figure out like what are really great news angles that they could go out to the market with. So there's a lot of opportunity within that.
That is exciting. And yeah, got to say, I love your guys' commitment to constantly improve that user experience and think how that's building out. Before we wrap, is there anything else from the state of AI in PR report that you wanted to make sure that we hit on, or that I didn't ask about?
I think that covers it really well, and I'd encourage everybody to download their own copy of it, and even if you don't have time to read the whole thing, just stick it into ChatGPT and ask it to summarize it for you. But there's a lot of great stuff in there, and I think it's a really powerful data. One thing I always tell people too is if you're listening to a podcast like this and you're reading this, like maybe you don't even need it because you're the one who's ahead of the curve and know that you need policies for AI and your team needs to use it. But it's great ammo if you need to convince your organization or your client hasn't yet fully embraced these trends, to show them the stats. And it can be just a very powerful way to drive change and make people realize the urgency of doing this kind of transformation.
Yep. So I would invite and strongly suggest everybody download that report, as well as some of the other reports. Like I said, last year we were looking at AI in the newsroom. You can follow Greg on social media. He is very consistent and prolific, and I get him delivered to my inbox every day. So always looking forward to the latest insights from Greg and Muck Rack. Well, Greg, thank you for joining us again on Building Brand Gravity and being a friend of the pod. I can't wait to see what research you do next year, so we can have you back and talk about that continued evolution. And I just want to thank all of our listeners for joining us here today, and tune in soon for the next episode of Building Brand Gravity, when we will be talking with industry leaders like Greg about the greatest trends that are out there impacting our industry.
That was a great discussion. I love speaking with Greg. I'm glad you had the chance to ask him about this research. And it really sticks in my mind, that stat you shared about 38% of comms pros saying they don't have, or they're not clear on the guidelines at their organization, agency or otherwise. And I have to say, I find that like a little shocking. I mean, shocking is a big word, but I find it a little surprising. It's one of the first things we did almost 2 years ago, is to try to set some ground rules, and we've been evolving them quickly. So I think that's a sign that there's a lot of intentionality that needs to happen very quickly, because this horse is way out of the barn running across the fields at this point.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing you really don't want to have, that kind of uneven adoption across your company. I mean, there's certainly risk, which is the first thing that comes to mind. But I also think about a lack of performance, right? If you're really not being intentional with how you're deploying it at scale. And I think one of the other things that's interesting is, AI is so embedded in multiple tools, even like Muck Rack itself, that I think sometimes when people hear that they're not really equating to the AI that's naturally in what they're doing. They're thinking literally, I've got to go into Chat GPT or Perplexity or Google Gemini or Copilot, pick your AI engine. I think they think about it more as a conscious effort than it being kind of integrated in how we work every day.
Well, the embedded everywhere is where it's going. I think that's why we're seeing different client organizations here and there. We'll probably talk about this in the next episode too, really struggling from a legal and procurement standpoint to understand like what their actual structure is for agencies and what they're allowing. But the guidelines piece, when we did our most recent update of our guidelines at the GNS Integrated Marketing Communications Group, there was a focus in the guidelines of what we want folks to do and what we want to be excited about, and that curiosity and the enthusiasm. So it's not just, I would really urge folks to think about AI guidelines, not just thou shalt not, but also what thou shalt, and really making that a mandate for people to catalyze and activate the learning and getting hands-on, and also asking themselves really the essential question, not what can AI do, which is like everything, but what problem do I have that might be solved?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's be interesting to see just how much those numbers continue to climb, in the adoption and to the use. I know me personally, how I'm using it now versus 3 weeks ago versus 3 months ago. It's a really interesting time professionally. But like what you said when we were talking earlier, you have to have the context, you have to have the counsel, you have to have the intentionality, which I think is going to be key. And I think those agencies and those brands that are very smart in how they use it are going to see a lot of potential to capitalize on AI.
I agree. Now, what's fun as we come to a close is I tend to ask guests on this show, what is it that has them in its gravity? This is Building Brand Gravity. So what, thing in the culture or reading or so. I'll start with mine, Steve, and then I'm going to ask you for yours. So right now, when we are recording this, and the news travels fast, so by the time this comes out, I don't know, maybe this will seem quaint to you all, but I've been very interested in watching the trials of Meta and Apple and Google, each special in their own way, each complex in their own way. The Apple and Google crossover is very interesting relative to the revenue that Apple derives from Google for search and Apple's sort of appearance at Google's trial. So I think that for me, I've been listening to a lot of other podcasts like Hard Fork and Vergecast and people really getting into it. What does it mean for the future of search? What does it mean for the evolution of AI? What is it signaling about how AI is used today? What does it mean to these business models? These companies, some are predicting they're going to look very different a year or two from now. And then also, how the government's looking at antitrust today. So that to me has been really fascinating. But Steve, what has you in its gravity these days?
Well, what has me in the gravity is a little bit in the sports and entertainment land. I've been fascinating watching the impact of the NIL, the name, image, and likeness in college, on communications, right? Now you're literally having debates of should somebody go pro or should they stay in college and make more money in college through that name, image, and likeness. You have all these groups, booster clubs, different groups are promising really high NIL contracts. So it's really forcing kids at 18 years of age to really be functioning and acting like professionals and to have full scale communications team behind them. So it'll be interesting to see how that continues to develop. I mean, you had something like last month, the NFL draft. Usually, hey, you paid attention to the top couple picks and you didn't pay any attention to that. I mean, this year there was heavy coverage through round 5. And, there's some great stories out there of where Tom Brady went and where Brock Purdy's went. And so there's just a fascinating storylines and communications tactics being done. And now you have just a horse race, not only who was drafted, who should have stayed in college. Now it's going to be who's going to be starting, why or why not. It's just amazing how once you click on a couple of stories on that, it gets in your feed.
And it's such a brand, you're right, it's such a transformational story from the brand perspective, and how more and more people are professionalizing in the use of these tools, social media, comms, media training, also fashion, WNBA, but also the NFL, how the suiting, the outfits, the intentionality about the communication of identity. So I love that one, Steve. I think that's great. And I think it's something to watch for sure.
And it was something unexpected. I was not planning to get that pulled into it, but it's fascinating to watch it play out. Well, that's going to wrap this episode of Building Brand Gravity. Make sure you tune in soon for our second part, where Anne's going to interview our own Lauren King. I can't wait to watch that episode.
Yeah, and as always, tune in, keep following us, check out our other episodes, and give us feedback. Thank you so much for listening.